It wasn't until I had finished my 6th novel that I finally discovered the real reason that I write, which is going to be different from the reason that you write or even the reason anybody else writes. But to kind of explain the reason I believe mostly I write is I'm going to tell you a story about myself. I had just graduated from college and I was in a car. We had just moved to Atlanta. And I was a single working girl and in a car with another girlfriend of mine, and we were driving down Peachtree Street, and she was having some kind of love affair angst that we have at 21, and it all seemed so important and so dramatic, and we were talking about it, and she said, I don't remember her exact words, but she was in total despair and was thinking about quitting the whole thing, and I said, well, don't you want to see what happens next? And she literally looked at me with such a look of disdain. This is one of my best friends. And she said, she shook her head and said, Patti, not everybody thinks like you. And I thought, oh my gosh. And I took it as an insult at the time, but it wasn't until 25 years later that I realized that that's actually a gift, that that's the way that I look at things, and that that's the way that I look at life, and that's probably the reason that I write. I always want to see what happens next. What happens next? I think it's not only a life worldview that I have, it's not only a reason that I write, but I think it's also a reason for a lot of hopefulness in my life. Because what is hopelessness but thinking things will never change? We feel hopeless when we feel like things will never change. But of course they change. Things always change. It might not be the way we want them to change. It might not be what we want them to change into. It might be better or worse than we imagine, but they're going to change. Something's going to happen and things are going to change. We can make them happen or they can happen to us. And I'm always eternally, optimistically, annoyingly hopeful about what will happen next. And it's not until now that I realize that's part of the reason that I write. I take these characters and I put them in these hopeless situations where it looks like there's no answer, there's no way to turn, and then I would say, well, what would happen next? And what would they do with what happens next? So that is part of the reason that I write. Now, how I came to writing is a little bit of a different story. That's a love story. A true love story has nothing to do with a guy. Writing for me originated in love, and I do it out of love. To me, writing is an act of love. It's an internal act of selfishly self-love. Because writing to me is something that unless it's internally driven and unless it's something that you're passionate about and moves you, and unless you're looking inward to pour the words outward, it's not a true act of vulnerable writing. This is from a book that actually won't come out until 2011. It is called The Life She Wrote. And I have a quote at the front of the novel that says, from Madeleine L'Engle, who is one of my favorite writers and has written one of my favorite books on writing, which is called Walking on Water. And she says this in that book: we as human beings tend to have the terrible gift of free will, this ability to make choices and to help write our own story. Madeleine L'Engle. Okay, this is from the book called The Life She Wrote. This is the prologue. 70-year-old Lillian Caulfield Eddington didn't write this part, this dying part. She wouldn't have, of course. She'd have written a completely different ending. After almost a lifetime of writing her life, writing herself into life, she thought she'd figured out all the rules. What fell under free will, what words had the most power, what hurt herself or others. She was wrong. Now she knows she was wrong. A fog-infused light slips into the room, soft and whispered, fading the edges of a room she wrote herself into years ago. If she'd known, really known, that this would be the last room, would she have written it the same way? Yes, she thinks. She's not the kind of woman who doubts her decisions. She thinks all of this in less time than it takes to read it. Her last thoughts are of her husband Redmond and her daughter Jenny, of how she didn't write this ending where she is alone, and he still doesn't love her. There is the instant where pain rips across her left breast, and then her breath settles into her chest, gathers her soul into the palm of its hands. Love me. A cry buried the deepest, hidden the longest, and known forever. Her last unheard cry, love me. So.